You thought you knew the passion of the Christ. You watched the film. You felt the weight of it. You believed you understood its power. But what happened behind the cameras is darker than anything on screen. October 5th, 2002, Matera, Italy. Lightning struck the set during the Sermon on the Mount. It hit Jim Caviezel directly, the man playing Jesus. Standing beside him was Jan Michelini, the assistant director. The bolt struck him too. Two men, same moment, documented. Caviezel's left hand went numb. Temporary paralysis. Medical staff confirmed it. That was the first time. Lightning struck Caviezel again during the crucifixion scene. Twice. These weren't rumors whispered after premiere night. They were witnessed, recorded, quietly brushed aside. Was it coincidence? Or did a film about the cross stir something no one expected? The injuries didn't stop there. Caviezel dislocated his shoulder, carrying the 150-pound cross. He developed pneumonia filming in sub-zero temperatures for 8 hours, wearing only a loincloth. The suffering wasn't acting, it was uncomfortably real. If you're ready to go deeper into what most people never talk about, stay with us. And if this story matters to you, subscribe now so you don't miss what happens next. Because before this film even existed, it existed as pressure. Mel Gibson was at the top of Hollywood, publicly dominant, privately divided. His faith wasn't symbolic. It demanded accountability, discipline, confrontation, values that don't survive easily in an industry built on image. That conflict followed him everywhere. He was surrounded by success, yet increasingly disconnected from it. The recognition no longer answered the questions he carried. What's the value of influence if it never points beyond itself? What's the point of belief if it stays comfortable? Those questions pressed on him daily. Friends noticed he spoke less, listened more, withdrew for long periods. His attention drifted from future projects toward something unresolved. He was preparing. The idea for this film didn't arrive as inspiration. It arrived as urgency. Gibson believed the story of Jesus' final hours had become distant, reduced to tradition and repetition. People recognized the cross but avoided the cost behind it. The suffering had become invisible. The physical demands arrived quickly. But what unsettled people wasn't the difficulty, it was the accumulation. Scene after scene required endurance rather than performance. The cross weighed 68 kilograms. When it shifted during one take, it slammed into Caviezel's shoulder. The joint dislocated. He didn't stop filming. Long hours in below-zero temperatures. 8 hours some days, wearing nothing but a loincloth and stage blood. The cold didn't just bite. It seeped into bone, into lungs. Caviezel developed pneumonia, then hypothermia. Medical staff stood nearby, monitoring his vitals between takes. But he rarely asked for intervention. When they offered breaks, he shook his head. There was something else, though, something the crew didn't talk about openly at first. During one crucifixion scene, a prop strike went wrong. The blow landed across his back. 14 inches of torn skin. Even with protective padding, the force broke through. The costume, soaked in fake blood for realism, wasn't changed often enough. Infection set in. Serious. Spreading. Still, he continued. This wasn't method acting in the traditional sense. It was something closer to surrender. Caviezel spoke less as the weeks passed, conserved energy, carried himself with a seriousness that never lifted, even when cameras stopped. Crew members began to notice a pattern. He didn't switch off. There was no visible moment where the weight released. No laughter during meal breaks. No small talk about normal things. It was as if the role had settled on him. Not worn, settled. like something that couldn't be removed at the end of a shooting day. Some tried to explain it away as dedication, intense preparation. But those who worked closest to him felt something else. A presence. Not from Caviezel himself, but around him. In the atmosphere of the set. In the long silences between takes. In the way certain scenes felt heavier than they should have. Was it exhaustion playing tricks, or was something else unfolding? What the crew didn't know yet was that the physical toll was only the beginning. The real cost was still accumulating beneath the surface. The margin between continuing and collapse was thinner than anyone realized. His body absorbed impact after impact, sometimes literally, not from recklessness, from realism that left no room for protection. The 68-kilogram cross dislocated his shoulder when it slammed into him during a mistimed lift. 8 hours in sub-zero temperatures wearing nothing but linen left him with pneumonia and hypothermia. During the crucifixion scene, a single miscalculation opened a 14-inch wound across his back. Equipment slipped, movements misaligned. Timing failed by seconds. Each incident alone might have been manageable. Together, they formed a pattern that even seasoned professionals found disturbing. There were moments when filming stopped, not because a scene was finished, but because Caviezel could no longer stand without assistance. Between takes, he sat silent, eyes closed, breathing controlled, as if concentrating on remaining present rather than reacting to pain. What unsettled the crew most was his refusal to dramatize what was happening to him. No anger, no visible fear, just acceptance. Then came October 5th, 2002. They were filming the Sermon on the Mount in Matera, Italy. Weather conditions changed without warning. What had been manageable suddenly turned violent. A lightning strike hit close enough to be felt by everyone nearby. Caviezel was affected directly. So was assistant director Jan Michelini, standing just feet away. For several seconds, no one moved. The set fell silent in a way that had nothing to do with discipline. Caviezel's left hand went temporarily paralyzed. He survived. But after that day, the way people looked at him changed. Not with admiration, with unease. Medical checks followed. Filming resumed. He returned to set quieter than before. Some noticed his hands shaking between scenes. Others noticed his focus sharpening, as if distraction was no longer an option. Privately, he began experiencing sudden disorientation, fatigue without warning, physical weakness that came in waves. Doctors advised caution. He continued. What drove him forward wasn't ambition. He later explained that walking away felt impossible, not because of contracts or pressure, but because leaving the role unfinished felt like abandoning something entrusted to him. By the end of production, his body had paid a visible price. Dramatic weight loss, lingering injuries, 6 months of physical therapy and shoulder surgery that followed him long after filming wrapped. Yet when asked later if he regretted it, he never framed the experience as loss. He framed it as consequence. And that distinction matters, because the question his experience raised was never whether the role was dangerous. It was whether some stories demand a price. As filming continued, something shifted. Attention moved away from the actors, away from individual suffering. It turned toward the environment itself. Something about the set felt unstable, not chaotic, unpredictable. These were experienced professionals, people who had worked through extreme conditions, desert heat, mountain storms, budget disasters. They knew how productions break down, but the usual rules no longer seemed to apply. Plans were made carefully, checked, double-checked. Then they unraveled without clear cause. Weather became the first warning. Forecasts were studied, schedules adjusted around them. Yet conditions changed abruptly, often mid-scene. Calm skies turned heavy without buildup. Wind arrived suddenly, strong enough to tear through equipment. Props that had been secured minutes earlier scattered. These shifts didn't follow patterns. They interrupted moments of focus, then vanished as quickly as they appeared. Technical failures followed. Lighting systems failed after passing inspections. Cameras powered down without explanation. Sound equipment cut out during emotionally precise moments, forcing retakes that left actors completely drained. Engineers searched for faults. Found none. Power sources were stable, wiring intact. Everything checked out. Still, the problems returned. At first, these disruptions were treated as coincidence. Large productions always face complications, but repetition has a way of changing interpretation. When the same type of failure occurs again and again, especially during specific scenes, people begin to pay closer attention. Quiet conversations started to circulate among the crew. Not dramatic claims, just observations shared cautiously. Someone mentioned the strange timing. Another spoke about a sense of pressure during certain sequences, as if the air itself felt heavier. These comments were never made loudly. They were exchanged in passing, between tasks, quickly dropped when others approached. Then there were the moments that couldn't be logged in reports. A sudden stillness before interruptions, a feeling that something was about to go wrong, seconds before it did. Crew members described stopping mid-action without knowing why, only to watch equipment fail moments later. No alarms, no warnings, just instinct. One incident stood out. During preparation for a major scene, multiple devices failed at once, not sequentially, simultaneously. Filming stopped. The delay stretched. The delay stretched longer than anyone expected. Frustration built. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, everything returned to normal. Systems restarted. Power stabilized. The scene resumed. No explanation was ever given. No solution documented. But something else happened. Instead of fear, a different response emerged across the crew. Focus deepened. Distractions faded. Jokes disappeared entirely. The set grew quieter, more deliberate. People moved carefully, spoke less, watched more. It was as if everyone sensed that precision mattered now more than usual, that mistakes carried weight beyond inconvenience. What made this shift unsettling wasn't belief in something supernatural. It was the absence of language. No one knew how to describe what they were experiencing without sounding irrational, so most chose silence. Yet silence did not equal dismissal. The environment had become an active presence, not hostile, not welcoming, simply there, interrupting when it chose to, refusing to be ignored. By this stage, the question was no longer whether the production was difficult. It was whether the story being told had begun to press back against the process of telling it. And once that thought took hold, it changed how every interruption was perceived, not as delay, but as response. The most unsettling moments didn't happen under lights or in front of cameras. They happened afterward. As filming progressed, several cast and crew members began experiencing disturbances that didn't stay on set. These weren't shared publicly at the time. They surfaced later in fragments, in interviews, in quiet conversations. What connected them wasn't drama, it was hesitation. People spoke as if unsure whether they should say anything at all. Sleep was the first thing to change. Some reported recurring dreams that felt unusually vivid, marked by repetition rather than narrative. The same images returned night after night, not copied from the script, but adjacent to it. Moments of waiting, watching, standing at a distance while events unfolded without intervention. The dreams didn't terrify, but they lingered. leaving exhaustion behind. Others described waking suddenly with a sense of presence. Not fear, exactly, awareness. As if something had interrupted rest without touching anything physical. These experiences were brief, difficult to describe, often dismissed by those who experienced them, at least at first. But as the days passed, the man holding it all together, Mel Gibson, the director who bet $30 million of his own money on a story Hollywood refused to touch. But now something was happening to him, too. Day after day, filming scenes of suffering. Repetition has a way of breaking through walls we build. What starts as craft becomes something else entirely. Actors noticed their emotions shifting without reason. Tears arrived before they were summoned. Silence stretched longer than any script demanded. Luca Leonello, the man playing Judas, later admitted something disturbing. For 3 weeks during filming, he heard whispers in his head, voices he couldn't silence. He was an atheist. He had no framework for what was happening to him. Then came the shared experiences. During a large crowd sequence, 2 crew members working separately reported the same thing. A figure moving through the extras, light-colored clothing, movement without urgency, a silhouette no one recognized. When they compared notes, the details matched. Neither could find anyone on set fitting that description. Not among the actors, not among the crew. Cinematographer Caleb Deschanel confirmed something else. 3 separate times, cameras failed during the crucifixion scenes. No technical explanation, no warning, just stopped. Producer Steve McEvedy documented 5 crew members reporting identical dreams. A man in white walking through desert. None of them knew each other well. None of them had discussed it before the reports surfaced. No medical records verified these claims. No psychological examination explained them away. But something shifted after that. People stopped talking about what they were experiencing. Not because they were told to, because words felt inadequate, as if speaking about it might change something that needed to remain untouched. Faith deepened for some, doubt sharpened for others, but everyone felt it. The story they were telling had refused to stay contained within the frame. It followed them home, into sleep, into silence. And when filming reached the crucifixion itself, Mel Gibson was present for nearly everything. Not hovering, not dramatic, just constant. He watched scenes repeatedly, often in silence, rarely interrupting unless something felt wrong. When he did speak, it was precise, controlled. There was no room for improvisation that might soften what was being shown. In an industry built on compromise, Gibson's refusal to adjust felt dangerous. He rejected suggestions that would make the film more accessible, less confrontational. When arguments arose, they weren't about logistics, they were about boundaries. How far was too far? At what point did realism become excess? Gibson's answer never changed. If the story was true, then restraint would be dishonest. But his leadership wasn't defined by severity alone. Behind the camera, something softer surfaced. When conditions became physically dangerous, he paused production without hesitation. When crew members struggled, he noticed. Warm drinks appeared. Breaks were extended. He checked on people personally, not as a gesture, but obligation. This duality confused many. He demanded absolute commitment to the material, yet showed unexpected care for those carrying it. Those close to him said his intensity came from fear, not control. Fear of distortion. He believed even small alterations could weaken the truth he was trying to convey. At times, the weight of that responsibility became visible. There were days when Gibson withdrew between takes, standing apart, watching the set as if measuring something unseen. Conversations paused when he approached, not out of fear, but uncertainty. People sensed the project had become deeply personal, bound to something he was unwilling to articulate fully. Outside the production, criticism continued to build. Accusations circulated. Questions multiplied. Gibson was aware of them. He did not respond. His focus narrowed instead, as if finishing the film was the only answer he intended to give. What set him apart wasn't confidence, it was resolve. He didn't act like a man chasing approval. He acted like someone who had already accepted the cost. Whatever followed, praise or condemnation, he had already decided what price he was willing to pay. Condemnation, criticism, consequences, none of it mattered anymore. The film needed to be finished exactly as it began, without compromise, without delusion. That attitude spread through the crew like a quiet fire. People worked longer hours, no complaints. Precision increased. Distractions vanished entirely. The sense of participating in something ordinary? Gone. Whether they agreed with Gibson or not, one thing became clear. Retreat was no longer an option. By this stage, the question had shifted. It wasn't about whether the film was controversial. Everyone knew it was. The real question was different. Was Gibson willing to carry the consequences of telling this story exactly as he believed it needed to be told? All signs pointed to yes. When filming finally ended, something felt wrong. Productions usually conclude with relief, celebration, distance. This time, separation felt incomplete. People returned home, resumed routines, stepped back into ordinary life. Yet something followed them, quietly. The work was finished. The effect was not. For many involved, the first sign was exhaustion that wouldn't fade. Not physical fatigue, something deeper. Conversations felt heavier. Silence lasted longer. Several cast members admitted later it took weeks before they could watch other films without feeling disoriented, as if the rhythm of normal storytelling had been permanently disrupted. Then the film was released. Reaction was immediate, intense. Viewers didn't respond passively. Some left theaters shaken. Others sat in silence long after the screen went dark. Reports surfaced of people becoming physically unwell during screenings. Ushers described moments of confusion as audiences reacted in ways they'd never witnessed before. Debate followed quickly. Religious leaders disagreed sharply. Critics argued over intention and impact. Supporters called it necessary. Detractors called it excessive. What stood out wasn't the division itself, it was the depth of it. This wasn't a film people simply liked or disliked. It demanded a response. For those who made it, that response felt deeply personal. Several actors chose not to participate in extended promotion. Interviews were measured, carefully worded. When asked about their experiences, many paused before answering, as if deciding how much could be said without misrepresenting something they still struggled to understand. But the lead actor, his experience was different entirely. One actor stepped back from everything, not retired, not hidden, just selective. Opportunities came, big ones. He turned most of them down. When he did speak about the film, his voice was different, calm, almost distant. He never called it an achievement. He called it something he survived. That word stayed with people. Survived. Meanwhile, the film kept moving. It reached countries where it was banned, edited, officially unavailable. People found it anyway. In places where religious conversation had been silent for decades, discussions began. Not always positive, but never indifferent. Then the money came, quietly. almost as an afterthought. The numbers were staggering. $612 million worldwide. But here's what's strange. The success felt hollow to those who made it, because money had never been the point. Everyone involved knew that immediately. What stayed wasn't the box office records. It was the transformation. Some people felt their faith deepen in ways they couldn't explain. Others began questioning beliefs they'd carried their entire lives without ever examining them. A few admitted the film unsettled them, left them with questions it never answered. Because it didn't resolve anything, it exposed. And maybe that was the real, lasting effect. The film left theaters, then headlines, then debates, but it never left the people who touched it. It stayed with them, not as a memory, as an imprint, which raises something uncomfortable. If a story can mark its creators this deeply, years after the cameras stopped rolling, then maybe its impact was never meant to end. For Mel Gibson, life didn't return to normal. The scrutiny intensified. Every interview, every public appearance, every future project, all viewed through the lens of what he had made. He was no longer just a filmmaker. He became a symbol. To some, courage. To others, controversy. That weight never lifted. What changed most was his relationship with silence. After the release, Gibson spoke less about faith, not because it mattered less, but because it had been exposed so completely. The film had taken something internal and placed it before millions. There was nothing left to explain. He had said everything he needed to say, with images, not words. But for others on that set, the transformation was quieter. The crew members who survived the production, they described something unsettling afterward. Smaller projects felt hollow. Routine storytelling lost its urgency. A few walked away from the industry entirely. Not burned out, not disillusioned, but because they'd already touched something that demanded more than technical skill. Others carried a different kind of weight home. Less noise in their lives, fewer distractions. Conversations became more deliberate. One former technician admitted he stopped treating stories as entertainment first. He began asking what they demanded from the audience in return. The lead actor's trajectory shifted completely. His career didn't collapse, it changed shape. Directors saw him differently. Audiences projected meaning onto him he'd never sought. He was no longer interchangeable. In later years, he spoke of the role as a dividing line. There was a version of himself before the film and a version after. Neither better, just different. The audience felt it too. For some, the film reignited faith. For others, it unsettled assumptions they'd never questioned. Many admitted they never watched it again, not because it lacked quality, but because it demanded too much attention. It wasn't background cinema, it asked to be endured. Years passed, yet the film refused to age quietly. New generations discovered it without the original controversy, and responded with the same intensity. That consistency suggested something unsettling. The reaction wasn't tied to its time, it was tied to its content. The film didn't comfort, it didn't resolve, it didn't explain, it confronted. So the real question was never about whether strange events occurred during filming. Those details, while disturbing, are secondary. The real question is this: why did so many people walk away changed? Why did one production leave such a long shadow across careers, beliefs, personal lives? Some will say it was dedication taken too far. Others will call it coincidence, amplified by interpretation. A few will insist something sacred was disturbed. But there's one perspective no one discussed publicly, one explanation that remained buried. The film itself offers no answer. It stands where it has always stood, silent, unyielding, waiting for you to decide what you saw and what it cost. And perhaps that is why it still unsettles, because the Passion of the Christ never asked to be liked. It asked to be faced, not consumed, not critiqued from a distance. Faced. The way you face a mirror in the dark when you're not sure you want to see what's looking back. I need to be honest with you. Digging into the production blocks for this story, it unsettled me. Genuinely. We usually think of movies as controlled environments, stages, cameras, scripts, but the reports of lightning strikes and physical agony on that set feel disturbingly real. It forced me to ask a question I didn't expect to ask. Were they just making a film, or engaging in something heavier? Something that doesn't fit neatly into the category of art or entertainment. The sheer weight Jim Caviezel carried wasn't acting, it was survival. And that's the kind of raw, unfiltered truth we aim to bring you here. Stories that don't just entertain, stories that confront you, that sit with you long after the screen goes dark. If you're tired of surface-level content, if you want to explore the mysteries that history tries to brush aside, this is your home. Subscribe to the channel. Let's keep uncovering what lies in the dark together. And let me ask you this. When something crosses the line between fiction and reality, between film and faith, what does that say about the story being told? Or about the forces surrounding it? Leave your thoughts below. This is Jesus of The Voice. Thank you for walking this path with us.